Hello dear students, I hope you all are doing great. It's nice to see you all again. Let's begin with our today's lecture which on river ecosystem. I, Dr. Sanjay Pagar, Associate Professor, Department of Geography. Dear student, I welcome you all in this online lecture series which is conducted by the Maratha Vidya Prasar Samajas, Charity Arts, BS Commerce and M Science, popularly known as KTHM College Nasik. Dear student, in previous lecture we have discussed very important subtopic that was function of ecosystem and type of ecosystem. Before starting with today's lecture, let's revise what we have seen so far. Firstly, we have discussed about the function of ecosystem. Later, we studied the type of ecosystem. Not to forget, we studied the equatorial ecosystem in brief. Dear student, for today's lecture, we have study objective or learning objective. By the end of this lecture, you should be familiar with the river ecosystem. Dear student, you know that river ecosystem is an important example of the freshwater ecosystem. What do you mean by the freshwater ecosystem? The freshwater ecosystem means a water ecosystem, aquatic water ecosystem that we observe in the drinkable water. Then also the river ecosystem are not completely stable. They are unstable due to the moving water or due to the flow of the water. River ecosystem is an important ecosystem that you observe in the river, in the flowing water. River ecosystem are the prime example of the Biotic ecosystem. Dear student, you know that we have many numbers of the large rivers that are available on the surface, such as Ganga, Mississippi, Danube, Jordan, St. Lawrence, Thames, etc. All these rivers have such type of the ecosystem. It means river ecosystem. They are the ideal example of river ecosystem that we observe on the surface. Let's discuss what do we mean by the river. A very simple definition of the river is a large natural flow of the water that goes across the land and into the sea. Another definition of the river is a river is a large body of the water flowing in a natural channel. Dear student, you know that rivers start at the source and often have many tributaries and finish in a mouth at a lake or a sea. When we are talking about the structure of the ecosystem, that you know that each and every ecosystem consists of two factors, that are abiotic factor and the biotic factor. In river ecosystem also, we have biotic and abiotic factor. If we are talking about the abiotic factor, in river ecosystem, we have the numbers of the abiotic factor. The important factor such as flow of the river, then we have sunlight. You know that sunlight is an important to a Biotic system because it provides the energy necessary to drive the primary production via photosynthesis process. You know that the producers are able to make their own food through the photosynthesis process with help of the sunlight. Therefore, in this ecosystem, sunlight is a very important abiotic factor. Then we have the various dissolved inorganic matter and the ions that we observe in river ecosystem, such as calcium, sodium, magnesium, potassium, bicarbonate, and chloride. We also have many other dissolved inorganic nutrients, such as the nitrogen, phosphorus, silica, and also we have some gases such as nitrogen, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. Last but not the least, the trace metals and pollutants that are also present we observe in the river ecosystem. This is all about the abiotic factor that play a very important role in functioning of the river ecosystem that we observe at our nearby rivers. If we are talking about the biotic factor, you know that each and every ecosystem we have three major biotic factors. They are producer, consumer, and decomposer. If we are talking about the biotic factor of river ecosystem, here we have the producers, especially in the green plants. It includes the factors such as plankton, algae, and mosses, and the other water plant that we observe in this ecosystem. The primary producer that compose the base of food web include the aquatic plants such as microphytes and algae. Here also we have some other algae which are known as the periphytes, means the clinging to the plants attached to the surface in the stem. Here we have the picture of this type of the algae. Then also we have the other algae or maybe the phytoplankton, that are suspended in the water. They are very microscopic algae. They are also we observe as a role of producer in this ecosystem. Dear student, if you are talking about the consumer, you know that in each and every ecosystem we have numbers of the consumer. Such as some consumers are herbivorous, whereas some consumers are the carnivorous. What do you mean by the herbivorous consumer? The consumers are the animal that only eats the grass and plants, whereas carnivorous means an animal that eats only meats. We have the example of this carnivorous consumer. The numbers of the birds like a kingfisher differ we observe in this ecosystem. Let's discuss one by one about each and every consumer. If we are talking of the primary consumer, in the primary consumer we include the larva, it's a very important insect, and the mollusk, and also we have the various invertebrates that we are also observed as a part of the primary consumer in the river ecosystem. Dear student, if we are talking about the secondary consumer, the most they are carnivorous consumer, or the carnivorous include such as fish, water beetles and frogs. They play as a role secondary consumer in this ecosystem. If we are talking about the tertiary consumer, it includes the larger fish, ducks, kingfisher and various aquatic birds. They play as a role of tertiary consumer in this ecosystem. Let's discuss about the one example of the food chain that we have observed in river ecosystem. The first, you know that each and every food chain start with the producer through the green plants. Here we have the algae that play as a role of producer in this ecosystem. Then we have the primary consumer. Here we have the insects that are play as a role of primary consumer. They eat algae and also play as a part of the primary consumer and each and every river ecosystem. If we are talking about the secondary consumer, in this ecosystem, we have the fish. They are the big fish. They play as a role of the secondary consumer. And lastly, we have the tertiary consumer. Each and every ecosystem, especially here, I am talking about the river ecosystem. Mostly, the birds play as a role of the tertiary consumer. The birds such as kingfisher, differ, and other type of the categories birds we have in this ecosystem. Dear student, one thing I would like to add here is that fish are probably the best known inhabitants of this lattice system that we observe each and every river ecosystem on the earth's surface. Let's discuss about the decomposer. The decomposer are also very important in each and every ecosystem. Here also, especially in this ecosystem, the river ecosystem, decomposer are mainly the bacteria and some fungi, which brings about the decay of the dead organic matter that we have in the river ecosystem. Bacteria present in a large numbers of lattice water, the flowing water, and they play very important roles in this river ecosystem. Then we have in this ecosystem the mildew bacteria and the water moles bacteria and the fungi. They are play as a role of the decomposer, and they conducting the function of the river ecosystem very smoothly. They are very useful to conducted this function. Dear student, this was about the primary, secondary, tertiary consumers and also the decomposer. Dear student, when we are talking about the river ecosystem, that we observe that each and every river ecosystem is badly affected by various human activity. especially due to the industrialization, urbanization, and various processes that are conducted or carried out by the human being that are affected on the river ecosystem. Water pollution, one of them, the construction of the dam, water tourism, excessive extraction of the sand from the riverbed, and that are using the construction of the various buildings. Therefore, these things are not good for sustainability of the river ecosystem. Therefore, it is very important to protect all these things, the river, water pollution, or there should not be any side effect of your human activity on the river ecosystem. The human beings are responsible to disturb the natural river ecosystem. One thing I would like to add here, rivers are among the most diverse and the treated ecosystem on the surface. Therefore, its conservation is very essential for future sustainable development and ecological balance. Otherwise, this type of the river ecosystem is definitely going to affect it on a large scale, and that will be the responsible to disturb the ecological balance that we have around us in the environment. Therefore, it's our duty to conserve all the river ecosystem through a conservative work. Dear student, this was about today's lecture. Now we finish the first chapter. In next lecture, we are going to discuss a very interesting and important second chapter of our subject. So, okay, goodbye. Thank you.